Hello all you fabulous Ford students. Here today to talk to you about natural selection and selective breeding. Our learning goals today, in this exercise you should be able to explain natural selection in your own words. You should be able to differentiate between natural selection and selective breeding, and you should also be able to provide examples of natural selection. So natural selection in a nutshell. Oops, kind of going too far there. Okay, so natural selection in a nutshell, we have some birds. These birds, they find the green beetles yummy. They don't like the brown beetles quite as much. So think about what's going to happen over time. They are constantly eating the green beetles. The green beetles are going to become less and less. So what's going to happen to the brown? Well, we're going to find out that we have more and more brown in the future. And that's basically the idea of natural selection. So what's needed for natural selection to occur? First off, we need variation in traits. For example, some beetles are green and some are brown. So those are variations in traits, differences in the traits. We also need overproduction. Most species produce far more offspring than can possibly survive. Why, you might ask? Why do they do this? Because some of their offspring are going to die and not be adapted. And they're going to be eaten, and they're going to be food for other organisms. And so they need to produce more offspring than can possibly survive for this reason, because some of them that's going to happen. Next thing we need is that there needs to be competition. And so members of a species, they must compete with one another to survive. They're going to be competing for food, space, and other resources. And all these things are going to be limited, and if they're competing for that, we're going to basically get natural selection occurring, because the ones who are the strongest and better adapted to the environment are going to be able to outmaneuver the others. So our end result, since the brown beetles live longer, they have more offspring. The brown coloration becomes more common in the population, and if this process continues, eventually all the individuals in the population will be brown. So natural selection is the process by which individuals that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce than other members of the same species. So it's survival of the fittest. Those that are better able to adapt to the environment, adapt to changes in the environment, who can find food better, they're going to be the ones who are going to more likely live longer and can pass their traits on. So here's an example of natural selection. I have two pictures. Each picture has two moths in the picture. Can you identify all four moths in these two pictures? Well, first two are kind of easy. He sticks out pretty good, and he sticks out pretty good. But what about the other two moths? Can you see them? Well, these are better adapted to their environments, so they don't stick out quite as much. So this is an actual example of the peppered moths, and we're looking back in 1845 in Manchester, England. And back then, the trunks of the trees in the forest were light grayish green in color due to the presence of lichens. So you can see our picture over here. This is what it looked like in 1845, the trunks of the trees. And so our white moths, our white peppered moths, they blended in very well with the trees, but our black ones didn't. And because of this, most of the peppered moths in the area were light colored with dark spots. Why, you might ask? Well, gee, the black ones stick out. If I'm a bird or a predator who'd like to eat these moths, the black ones are very easy for me to find, and I'm more likely to eat those before they are able to reproduce and pass on their traits. So from 1845 to 1890 in Manchester, England, the Industrial Revolution progressed, and the trunks of the trees became covered with soot and turned dark. And so what we now see is that the tree bark looks like this. So now the black ones are blending in better than the white ones. And so over a period of 45 years, the dark variety of peppered moths became more common. And the white ones, the peppered colored ones, they became less common, and we saw fewer and fewer of them until the black ones were the most common variety in the population. So the idea of natural selection comes from Charles Darwin, and in the 1850s he discovered 15 species of finches on the islands of the Galapagos. So he was on the voyage on a ship called the HMS Beagle that traveled all the way around the world from England. And one of the stops along the way was the Galapagos Islands, this island out in the Pacific Ocean that was fairly new in geologic standpoint, and was at one point it was a volcanic island, so it didn't exist. So the volcano erupts, and all of a sudden we have our islands there. And what he found is these 15 varieties of finches, and Darwin discovered that there were many variations of one kind of bird, or the finch. So it was different forms of the same species. So what he basically said is that at some point in time, a small population of one species of finch made it to the island, and then from the different environments on the islands, they adapted to those environments. So they had variations in traits, they overproduced, and they adapted, and they competed for resources, and so they adapted and changed to fit their environment. He noticed that there were finches with large beaks on some islands, and some finches had small beaks. And they all had different food resources depending on what their beaks looks like. So you can kind of see here the pictures of all the different finches. And what Darwin said is these all came from one species of finch, and over time we developed these 15 different species adapted to the Galapagos Islands. He also had a theory on horses as well. We can see kind of our 30 million years ago what the horse looked like, and how it slowly changed over time. So here's 30 million years ago, or here's 60 million, 40 million, 30 million, and 10 million, a million years ago is where we start to see the modern horse. But what's happened to the horse, how it's changed over time like this, is through natural selection. The modern horse appears to evolve from an animal about the size of a fox, so that's where the horse started from. And the early ancestors of the modern horse were much smaller and had several spread out toes that they used for walking on moist forest floors. So it lived in the forest, so it was really small, could weave around trees real easily, but slowly over time the environment was slowly changing. And as the environment changed, when we started to have the appearance of large grasslands, well, the horse had to adapt to his environment. And so due to variations in his traits, over millions of years, the animal developed longer legs and began using only one toe to balance its weight, and therefore it could run faster and escape predators out on the grasslands. Well, natural selection is caused by changes in the environment, adaptations to adapt to the environment. Another process we have is selective breeding. In the process of selecting or choosing specific plants or animals to breed for a particular desirable genetic trait. So who's doing this? Well, humans are doing this. Humans are controlling the traits that we desire. So we're looking for the traits that we want. Typically, strains which are selectively bred are domesticated, and the breeding is sometimes done by professional breeders. So our differences between natural selection and selective breeding: natural selection is change in genetic traits over time because of environmental factors. So that's going to be natural selection is controlled by the environment. Whereas our selective breeding is the mating of parent organisms by humans to produce desired traits in the next generations. So natural selection is controlled by the environment. Selective breeding is controlled by humans. Organisms that are able to live longer have the opportunity to reproduce. The more organisms that have a trait, the more likely it is to be passed on to a next generation. So domestic animals are animals that are said to be tamed or made fit for the human environment. This is things like horses, cats, dogs. So we selectively breed, and humans are controlling and influencing the characteristics or behaviors. Some examples of things that we have done this with: chickens, dogs, and cows. We also do it with plants, things like corns and fruits and vegetables. We're doing it with all sorts of things. So if we look here, I'm looking at chickens. We've taken one type of chicken and we have bred several different varieties. We've done the same thing with dogs. We've gone from the wolf, wild dog ancestor to all of our different breeds of dogs. And you can look at all our dogs we have selectively bred. And we are constantly coming up with new dogs all the time. We've also done it with the wild pig. It was native to Europe and Asia and Africa, but we selectively bred it to be more docile and to produce a higher quality of meat and to be easier to handle. And so we've gone from our wild pigs right over here to our domestic pigs. Selective breeding can also bring about bad or undesirable traits. Sometimes we try to breed some dogs to be aggressive, to be guard dogs, and sometimes that we end up producing dogs that are way too aggressive and we cannot control. So sometimes we overdo it a little bit. Here's some other problems with selective breeding. Humans decided they wanted something that was strong like the horse, but it had the sure-footedness and the balance of a donkey, so it could have the strength to travel like a horse, but it could travel through mountainous areas really easy, kind of like the donkey can. And so they crossed these and they got a mule, which does exactly that. It has the strength of a horse and it has the balance of a donkey. But some problems with the mule is that it's stubborn, it's hard to handle, hard to deal with, and they're sterile, meaning we cannot reproduce one mule with another and get baby mules. We breed cows for particular traits. For example, we breed them for their milk production. Some cows are bred so that they produce high amounts of milk even when they're not pregnant or not with young. We breed some milk as livestock for meat, so we breed different varieties of meat. You might go to the store and see that you can get an Angus steak or you can get a Kobe beef steak, and those are just different varieties of cows that we have bred. We also breed them for strength for pulling a plow. We breed them for no horns for safety. We breed them for manure, for fertilizer. So lots of different things that we breed our cows to be able to do. So why do we breed plants? Well, we want higher yielding. Basically, we want them to make more food, and we want the food to be bigger, or bigger fruit. We also want them to be resistant to pest and disease. We're also drought resistant, or regionally adapted to different environments and growing in different conditions. Domestication of plants is an artificial selection process conducted by humans to produce plants that have more desirable traits than wild plants. Some undesirable things they're dependent on artificial environments for their continued existence. Basically, a lot of our plants that we have bred, some of the tomatoes, you go to the store and you get the seeds at the store for tomatoes. If you throw those out in the wild, let them go, they're probably not going to grow. They need humans to come help them out and give them the things that they need. Here's an example of selective breeding. We have one wild species of wild mustard, and we have selectively bred it, and it stalks for different things. For example, from our wild mustard, we have developed broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, all sorts of different vegetables from one species of plant. They all seem like they are different, but they actually were bred. They're the same species. They were just bred from the same species of plant. So this is an example of natural selection. We chose the traits that we wanted, and this is what we get. Corn's another example. Over here on this side you can see this is what wild corn looks like. It's a very small amount of kernels on it, very few kernels on it. We have over time selectively bred to get larger ears of corn with a lot more seeds on it. Thank you very much. Hope you learned something about natural selection and selective breeding.